Bryan Johnson has spent millions measuring his health. So why did one abnormal lab result go unexplained for more than 11 years?
Recently, Bryan Johnson announced he'd been diagnosed with autoimmune gastritis. Most people saw that headline and thought, blueprint failed. I think they're looking at the wrong mystery.
Because once you see what that one number was trying to tell him, you'll never look at your own blood work the same way. We all know Bryan Johnson's self-proclamation as the most measured man in history.
That's right. If you can measure it, he's going to track it.
Yet there was one abnormal marker that refused to make sense for him as he's been tracking his body for the last 11 years.
For most of us, this one metric, we would say, we got hundreds of others. What does this one metric matter?
So this one marker had to do with his ferritin. His ferritin was staying low, and they considered many different explanations over the years, but none of them really completely fit.
If someone collecting this much health data could still have an unanswered question for over a decade, what does that mean for the rest of us?
The mystery isn't that Bryan Johnson got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. The mystery is why this one abnormal result stayed unexplained for so long. Most people would look at this and their evaluation would be either blueprint failed or it doesn't pay to track your health. It just doesn't work.
I think neither of those conclusions are accurate. It's just one extreme or the other. And really, the real answer lies with the patterns and the trends and looking at that data.
Health tracking isn't supposed to eliminate uncertainty. It's supposed to tell you when the current explanation may not be the whole story.
The remarkable part of Bryan's story isn't that he eventually got a diagnosis. It's that one persistent signal kept refusing to let the investigation end.
But before we get to what finally happened, we need to understand why ferritin wasn't actually the diagnosis. That's where almost everyone misunderstands this story.
Think of ferritin as the fuel gauge in your car versus that check engine light. So one low ferritin result can have many explanations. Sometimes replacing iron might solve the problem. Sometimes it only changes the number while the real cause stays hidden. The meaning of that marker changes when it keeps coming back again and again, year after year.
One low ferritin result, it's a snapshot. But 11 years of unexplained low ferritin, that's a pattern. And that's the difference. Eventually, ferritin stopped acting like that fuel gauge and started acting like a check engine light.
Ferritin didn't diagnose autoimmune gastritis. It simply refused to let an incomplete explanation become the final answer.
So now we ask a bigger question. What role did blueprint actually play? We know tracking didn't prevent the disease. Tracking also didn't cause the disease.
What it did was preserve years of context, showing that this wasn't random noise.
Here's where we need to take a step back and realize that tracking or blueprint, it's not a shield. It's more like a radar. It's not meant to block us from anything harming us, but it's meant to give us insight into things that we can't see.
And most importantly, alerting us when there's a problem, right? We can't overcredit blueprint, but we also can't dismiss it. Tracking doesn't replace doctors and it doesn't guarantee answers, but preserving long-term trends makes it much easier to recognize when something deserves another look.
Blueprint's greatest value isn't in preventing disease, it's in preserving the signal long enough for the right questions to finally get asked.
Most of us don't need Bryan Johnson's testing budget.
It would be pretty nice if we had it, so...
Donations accepted.
Yeah, Bryan, hi.
What we need is a way to think about our own abnormal labs. This is where we consider the signal test.
The signal test is 4 questions that we use in order to evaluate our lab results.
The first question is whether or not this is a snapshot or a pattern. Is this something that's appeared on your lab results for 11 years, for instance, like Bryan Johnson's?
The second question we ask ourselves is, could something temporary explain what was going on? For example, when I did my Bryan Johnson lab results, I had a couple of things that affected it, and it turned out to be very negative for my test. We called it a bad draw.
It was a bad draw or user error. The third question is, has this happened before?
With Johnson, we saw the results, right? 11 years of low ferritin before he finally figured out that it's an autoimmune disease.
And finally, does the explanation actually fit the evidence? We know it took Bryan Johnson 11 years to figure out what was really going on.
And of course, the goal here is not to become a rich biotech billionaire, unless that's your goal, to each their own. The goal is to become harder to fool with your own data.
Health data doesn't exist to hand you perfect answers. It exists to help you ask better questions. And that's the lesson I'd copy from Bryan Johnson. Not the supplements, not the budget, and not the protocol. Really, the mindset to be looking at the patterns and the trends.
Bryan Johnson's abnormal blood work taught us not to ignore a persistent pattern. My abnormal blood work taught me not to panic over a single abnormal result. Sometimes the hardest part isn't finding the signal, it's separating the signal from the noise.
A healthy life isn't about having perfect numbers. It's about becoming someone who knows which numbers deserve another question and which ones deserve a little more patience.
Bryan Johnson's abnormal blood work taught us why persistent patterns deserve more investigation. My abnormal blood work teaches us the opposite lesson. Don't let one scary result convince you that you found the answer. In the video we post right here, we run my first blueprint labs through that same signal test. We separate the real signals from the temporary noise, and we show why reacting too quickly can be just as dangerous as ignoring a pattern altogether.